Hello there. Thanks for joining me. I am Dr. Jen, and I'm so pleased you joined me for today's show. Today, we're exploring the location-specific tenancy guidelines for Arkansas. In my location-specific episodes, I have included all kinds of hyperlinks and resources to that location's website, resources, all kinds of things in the show notes. So I've got 3 hyperlinks at the moment. I may add to that as we do the show. But this is all to get you set up with the Arkansas Landlord Tenant Laws. Now, if you're new to the show, each of my location-specific podcasts is set up in the exact same way, answering the same 4 questions, in this case for Arkansas. What are the basics of the landlord-tenant laws in Arkansas? And 2, what are the nuances in that location? 3, what is some guidance about abandoned items if a tenant abandons the unit? What is a landlord supposed to do with this stuff? And 4, where to get help in your local area in Arkansas. And then at the very end of the episode, I'll go through what I call my bingo card. This is the list of the most standard items I see when I do these location-specific episodes. I'll review what's there, what's missing, and even what's extra. But I've got to put a great big disclaimer on this episode that even 10 minutes after I record it, it could change. Law does update and change, and it could change for your specific area. So you've got to do your own homework for your city, county, regional district, parish, whatever it might be, because that may not apply to this episode, but at least we'll get you started. So do your own homework. Make sure you stay current. I'm also going to give a shout out to today's sponsor, Aloha Capital Investments, LLC. If you want to know what Michael and I are doing in real estate investing, or you want to be a part of it, please check out alohajv.com. Okay, at this point, if you are watching me on YouTube at My Life as a Landlord, I'm going to screen share and we're going to jump into the basics of Arkansas Landlord Tenant Laws. So give me just a sec here. I'm going to change. Here we go. Beautiful. Okay, so here is Arkansas Landlord Tenant Handbook. And this, of course, this hyperlink is in the show notes, so don't panic if you can't see it. As we go through, so rights as a tenant, responsibilities as a tenant, this is very tenant-centric, but that's okay. Eviction, security deposits, rental agreements, abandonment. This is some of the items you can see we're already getting in here. Alternatives to standard rental arrangements, fair housing, homelessness, and organizations. I'm not going to read all of these, but I am going to scroll through looking for the high points, especially since this is written for the audience as the tenant, not as the landlord, but still, it's still good information for all of us. Let's see. Okay, so problem housing. So there you go right into problem housing, that if a tenant has a problem with the rented property, notify the landlord or perhaps the landlord's agent immediately. If the landlord does not respond to your notice, contact the appropriate government agency to have the property inspected. Okay, so some Arkansas cities have established criminal nuisance abatement boards to address and remedy continuing public nuisances. So this is in the event this is systemic. Criminal nuisance abatement boards have broad authority to regulate public nuisance by ordering landlords to comply with state and local safety codes, ordering eviction of tenants who are responsible for criminal conduct, or even closing all or part of the premises until the nuisance is abated. Landlords who violate this order of abatement can be fined up to $250 per day. Oh boy. So paying rent, landlord's lien, eviction, unlawful detainer procedure. If a landlord feels a tenant has violated the terms of a lease or rental agreement, either by failure to pay rent or otherwise, an unlawful detainer proceeding may be started. So an unlawful detainer action is started by giving the tenant 3 days notice of the lease or rental agreement violation. So either mischief or maybe non-payment. During the 3-day period, the tenant must either vacate the property or risk being ultimately held by a circuit or chancery judge to have a committed legal violation known as an unlawful detainer. If the tenant vacates the property, usually no other further legal action will take place. But since the 3-day notice requirement is very short, no kidding, it's very short, many tenants are unable or unwilling to vacate the property. So then it goes into writ of possession, and you have 5 days to file for an extension. So this is, okay, so this is unlawful detainer procedure. And then there's municipal court procedure. Okay, so this Unlawful detainer procedure is it for mischief. Municipal court procedure looks like it is for payment. That if tenants refuse to pay the rent provided for the lease or, yeah, right. And then refuse to vacate the property within 10 days after being notified to do so, then they still have to go through the court order. So then they've got this great flow chart. This is actually really helpful, especially for engineering minds like mine. Unlawful detainer procedure. You go through this flow chart. Landlords believe breach of lease or rental agreement has occurred, and then the landlord serves a notice of 3 days notice to quit on the tenant, and then either they smarten up or they move out. Um, that's that, and procedure usually stops unless the landlord sues the tenant for unpaid rent or damage. If the tenant does not move out, a complaint is served on the tenant, and then they either respond or they don't. If they do respond, then it seems like it could go to an eviction, but you need a judgment for that. If the tenant does respond in writing for 5 days, a hearing is held, and then it can be a writ of eviction, or the tenant can be removed. So that is unlawful detainer. But then you've got municipal court. Now, municipal court is about paying failure to pay rent, right? So 10-day notice to pay or vacate, and they either pay or vacate, or if they don't, then they have to go before the judge. Yeah. How can you be told you're being evicted? Interesting. So that's like the very first thing that comes up in landlord tenant in Arkansas is basically the trouble aspect. Like we haven't talked about the lease yet. We haven't talked about security deposits. We haven't talked about any of that. Habitability. We haven't talked about any of that yet. We're going to get into that, but yeah, security deposits. Let's see. How do they do that? Potential. Just looking at how much, usually when either a residential or commercial tenant enters into a rental agreement. Just reading through here. So which security deposits are regulated? In all instances where the landlord, any corporation or partnership or other entity owns at least 5 dwelling units, which are rented to the member of the public, or the rental property is managed by someone other than the landlord, regardless of the rental units owned, then you have to have a security deposit. Oh, here we go. Maximum security deposit is 2 months rent. If a security deposit is regulated within 30 days after the termination of a tenancy, all property or money given to the landlord must be returned to the tenant. And then it talks about what about damages, loss of security deposit. Then you've got to give notice. The notice of intent to retain all or some of security deposit must be mailed first class to the last loan address of the tenant. Very often you will not get a forwarding address, so you might have to send it to the address of the unit and it might get forwarded. The tenant should always provide the landlord with a written statement of where they can be reached, because if the landlord is unable to find the tenant within 180 days after the required mailing, the security deposit goes back to the landlord. It becomes property of the landlord. Criminal nuisance abatement, we've talked about this. Protecting yourself. So this is a checklist about habitability, right? Screens on the windows. Is there enough hot water? Can you control the heat? Windows and doors lock, toilets flush. I mean, this is basic habitability stuff, right? This is talking about leases, what's in the lease, the requirements of what's on here, what the lease is covering, the property, the location, the amount, the person's responsible for the utilities. Abandonment. Here we go. Your landlord can assume that you've abandoned your rented property if the property is vacant for an extended period of time. It doesn't say exactly how long, but just extended period of time. And you do not pay your rent within a reasonable period after the date is due, even if you've left behind your furniture, your belongings, right? Abandonment can be assumed if the property is vacant for an extended period and you've not told the landlord. Yeah, if you abandoned, then the property in violation of your rental agreement, the landlord can take the property and re-rent it to someone else. You're responsible for any costs the landlord has to re-rent for the property, plus any costs. Landlord's liens and abandoned property. Under Arkansas law, upon voluntary or involuntary termination of, it says commercial or residential or rental agreement, all property left in and about the rented property is considered abandoned and may be disposed by the landlord as the landlord sees fit without the need to consult with the tenant or give notice to the tenant. Wow. Wow, there's no time limit. It's like if it's abandoned, whatever's in there is instantly the landlord's. Wow. Other places you've got to store it and make note of it, and try to sell it, but you have to wait a bunch of days. Here, there's none of that. It's instantly the landlord's. Wow. Okay. Alternatives to standard rental agreements. This is talking about all kinds of housing assistance, and it gives a bunch of contact information, like pages and pages of contact information. This is about Section 8. Oh my goodness. Wow. Like pages and pages of Section 8. Okay. This is a glossary. Okay. That's actually really good. And it's in alphabetical order. Sometimes it's not, so that's good. Let's see. Abandonment. Let's see if they do abandonment. I haven't seen anything regarding late fees or landlord retaliation. Hmm. Okay. Okay, so now they're talking about they've jumped back to lease and standard rental agreement clauses, payment of rent, quiet enjoyment, insurance, utilities, improvements, sublets, assignment, partial destruction, default, rights of re-entry. Oh, and that's the end. Oh, okay. Hmm. All right. So that is a little bit about the handbook. Let's go to some of the other. I've got two other hyperlinks so far. So this is the Attorney General of Arkansas, and you can see it's consumer protection, which is normal, and then landlord and tenant rights. So let's just scroll down here about landlord and tenant rights. Doesn't look like there's a lot on here, but let's make sure that we've got this. So Arkansas laws on such issues apply to private rental units and not government subsidized housing. So this is not Section 8. This is not HUD governed at all. Landlords must provide notice of at least one rental period before raising the rent, and it applies to all leases, whether oral or written. So one rental period. Hmm. One rental period. What if you rent for 1 year? That's interesting. If you plan to sublease your apartment or house, you typically must obtain prior approval from the landlord. That's true. And if you plan to move out, have a written lease agreement, you must give notice according to the provisions in the lease. If you plan to move out and have an oral lease agreement, you must give one rental period's notice. So it seems that they're saying one rental period. It appears that there's an implication that maybe it or connotation that it's month to month. So raising the rent would be 1 month notice, and same thing with if you plan to terminate, you've got to give 1 month notice, it looks like. So that's under tenant rights. Landlord rights in Arkansas, landlord may give notice of lease termination for any reason. Wow. A landlord may give notice of lease termination for any reason. Even model tenants may be subject to having lease terminated. The landlord must give one rental period notice for an oral lease and provide according to the terms of the written lease. Further, state law provides that upon voluntary or involuntary termination of the lease agreement, all property left in the dwelling by the tenant will be considered abandoned, like on time, abandoned and disposed of by the landlord. All property left on the premises by the tenant is subject to a lien in favor of the landlord. Wow. Repair and maintenance. When you rent a house or an apartment, you usually take it as is. This means that the landlord is not required to provide additional maintenance to the dwelling. However, the city building codes are there to protect your health and safety. If you have a health or safety problem with your dwelling, contact the city, or better yet, talk to your landlord to find out the residence complies with housing codes. If your landlord promises to make repairs, make sure that the promise is in the written lease. And even if a landlord does not make the promise repair, a tenant should continue to pay the rent. Security deposit provides tenants with added protection. This law only applies to landlords who rent 6 or more dwellings, and it contains the following provisions. Interesting. You cannot be charged in excess of 2 months' rent for security deposit. And when you move, the landlord must return your security deposit within 60 days. Now, before it had said 30, I believe, but here it says 60. Okay. If the landlord deducts from your security deposit, must give you a written itemized list of the charges held within 60 days. And the landlord may withhold the entire amount of the security deposit if damages or unpaid rent exceed the amount of the security deposit. So there's 2 evictions. We talked about unlawful detainer eviction and the municipal court eviction. This is talking about discrimination, fair housing, and protected classes. So I'm going to skip to the end of this. And then Arkansas Legal Services Landlord Tenant Information. I'm going to go ahead and open this in new tab. In fact, it's the same one I have. This is the next one I have. So it's the same one, but there is Arkansas Community Action Agencies. Let's see what that one is. Arkansas Community Action Agencies Association. Self-efficiency. Okay, this is interesting. I'm just trying to make sure if this is for housing. Um, I don't think so. Targeted domains, workforce, education, healthcare, housing, etc. Okay, it is. I'm going to add this as a hyperlink in the show notes. If for anything else, it's another reference for help. Because if you can't find anybody to help you, at least go there. I guarantee you they will. So it says click here to find your local agency. Somebody somewhere will be able to help you. Let's jump back to Attorney General of Arkansas. Again, you can also give them a call in Little Rock. Looks like they've got a toll-free number, 1-800-482-8982. And you can also file a consumer complaint. There's a couple other ones that you could do. All right, let's move on to the next one. This is the landlord tenant page on Arkansas Law Help. And so it talks a little bit about security deposits, fair housing and discrimination, assistance animals, and the Landlord Tenant Act, along with evictions. So let's jump to security deposits. Talking about paying it no more than 2 months rent. Oh, they have a security demand letter packet. Let's open that up. Security deposit demand letter packet. And it looks like this. Okay. So this is helpful. Oh, and it's fillable. Oh, that's fantastic. So this is for so this is for the tenant to send to the landlord demanding that the security deposit get returned. And then it talks about how to do it. Arkansas law, you should know. This is actually very helpful because it talks about the applicable aspects of the landlord tenant law on that. That's cool. I like pre-made forms. That's helpful. So this is talking about Fair Housing Act and making sure that there's no discrimination going on. And there's a bunch of different links here. Fair Housing Act, Housing and Urban Development, Fair Housing Commission. That's good. Assistance animals in housing, including reasonable accommodation, which is a change in rule, policy, practice, or service of a housing provider that may be necessary to allow a person with a disability an equal opportunity to use and enjoy their home. And this is something where it's almost like an extension. It's like, when someone needs help walking, they have a cane. I liken that in my rentals when someone says, hey, do you mind if I put up grab bars on my shower? No, I don't mind. In fact, we're going to do it for you. And that's a reasonable accommodation, which is kind of cool. So assistance animals, there's lots of education in the library about animals. So if you have a question about assistance animals, emotional support animals, service animals, pets, any of that, wildlife, please don't just limit it to this episode. Go back to the library and search for animals. Talks all about how a service animal versus an emotional support animal, types of animals, what housing providers can ask and what they can't ask, right? So, and then how to request, oh, here we go, reasonable accommodation or modification request. This is a tenant requesting or requesting a landlord to do something like, can they put in a ramp or, like I said, grab bars, things like that. That's cool. So it's a fillable form. There we go. Okay, let's go back up to the top. Let's go back to Residential Tenancy Act. What is required from a tenant, landlord, exclusions. So this is just a short little blurb here. And let's go into evictions, failure to vacate criminal evictions. I think we've hit most of these subsidized housing evictions. I'm not going to go through that one. Unlawful detainer evictions. This is if there's mischief going on. I'm going to, yeah, how it works with like a hearing, pre-hearing trial, pro se and objection to writ of possession. This is actually good. So this is a tenant who's trying to object for a landlord taking over possession. If you've got a deadbeat landlord, then that's good that you know that. Lockouts and self-help evictions. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to go through my bingo card because I think we're nearing the end of our Arkansas list of items. Okay, so we did not see anything regarding a tenant application fee. If you do charge a tenant application fee, make sure it's reasonable and it actually is it's refundable and it's typically reasonable, right? Like it's an actual cost that you're doing for like a credit check or a criminal background check, something like that. Grace period for late without penalty. I didn't see anything, but I also saw a 10-day notice to quit, or pay or quit, pay or get out, right? Late fee amount, didn't see anything about a flat fee, a percentage amount, or a max amount. Security deposit, we know that it's no more than 2 months rent, and it's got to be in a separate account. Actually, it didn't even say separate account. I always put my deposits in a separate account because it's not money. It's the tenant's money. It's not operating money. Lease wording and details, yes, there is a detailed checklist of what needs to be in it, but there's no draft lease. There's no pre-made forms. Is an emergency contact required in the event of tenant abandonment, incapacitation, death, or imprisonment? Nope. There's no emergency contact required, but that's always a good idea to do that. Pets and animals, did it talk about pet deposit or pet rent? Nope. If you've got a question, then I suggest that you reach out to one of these helps, law help or legal aid. Is delivery of signed lease required? Didn't say anything about delivering an executed lease. Condition inspection at move-in. No, but if you're going to deduct out of the security deposit, you're holding a security deposit, it's very good practice to have a condition inspection at move-in. Standard warning letters or wording. Nope, no, there's no standard warning letters. It just says you have to give proper notice, especially if a landlord isn't doing a repair, right? Or a tenant isn't behaving. You've got to give notice, some kind of a warning letter potentially. Required maintenance inspections. Nope. How often can the rent be increased? It looks like it says once per rental, after a rental period, which we're assuming is a month. But how often can it be increased? What is proper notice on a rent increase? Again, how much can the rent increase? It doesn't say any of that. Renter's insurance is not mentioned. Abuse of access, it is defined. Proper notice is defined, so we'll say yes. What about landlord retaliation defined or timing? Nope, it wasn't talking about landlord retaliation at all. End of a fixed lease, it does appear to be abrupt. It does not appear to convert to month automatically. But again, your local area in Arkansas may be different. Condition inspection at time of move out. Again, if you're holding a security deposit, this is good practice, and make sure it's written, not just pictures and videos. You want to make sure it's written down. Return a deposit, you must return it within 60 days. And if the tenant hasn't actually received it within 180 days, then it becomes the property of the landlord. Use of the deposits is last month's rent. The answer is yes. And abandoned items. It does not matter if the unit is abandoned, all of the items inside instantly become property of the landlord. Interesting. I've learned quite a bit in Arkansas. This is really neat. In each of my location-specific podcasts is set up the exact same way. Once again, answering the same 4 questions. What are the basics of that location? What are some of the nuances of that location? What about abandoned items and property in that location? And what about getting help in your location? And then I reviewed my bingo card on the most standard items I see in tenancy laws in the different locations. It's the same format for every location specific episode. So if you're interested or you're looking at rentals in another geographic area, you already know the format. I have quite a few location specific episodes in the library and getting more all the time. One more time, this episode is not all inclusive. You must do your own research further for your local area and also to keep current because things can and do change. Make sure you're doing your own research. But if you're listening to this podcast, chances are you're either new to real estate or you might be new to real estate in Arkansas. Things you can do to help yourself are actually read the tenant laws, go through all the resources that I've provided in the show notes, and there's going to be more. The other thing you can do is to get in the either the physical room or the social media room with other Arkansas landlords. There's lots of Facebook groups, and you can just say, hey, I'm a new landlord in Arkansas. Where are my Arkansas landlords? And I guarantee you they will jump out. And there might be meetups, there might be physical group meetings or chamber meetings or rotary meetings. There might be something that's in your local area that you can actually get into the room with other landlords that are learning just like you in this area. So make sure you are educating yourself. You want to ask the same questions. You want to get in the area, get in the room with the people who've learned lessons in Arkansas with you. So thanks for watching the show. Don't forget to subscribe for more expert advice and real stories from across the rental property world. I'm recording this episode today from my boat in Westview Harbor in Powell River, British Columbia. Why? Because real estate takes you places. Where do you want real estate to take you? Join me in the next episode live right now in the library, episode 173 about the state of Arizona. See you there.